Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Boostara podcast, where we meet leaders in business and uncover the truths and insights from their amazing experiences. At Boostara, we help businesses grow revenue, cut costs, and gain business insights. If you're interested in learning more, then please type the words growth into the comments below, and I'll be sure to reach out to you. Today, we have a very special guest, the director of partnerships at World Rugby, Tassilo Hanau. Hello and welcome today, Taz.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I mean, that is a hell of a way to start a podcast. Well done.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very excited to have you on, Taz, but I guess a lot of listeners maybe won't be so familiar with who you are and exactly what you do. So could you kind of run us through exactly what do you do and what's been your journey to getting to the position you're in at the moment at World Rugby?
Be happy to. I think a lot of our listeners will probably already stumble at my names. Tassilo is Taz, as you rightly say. That's probably the best place to start. I'm probably one of those annoying classmates everyone had when they were 12 and 13 who already knew what they wanted to do with their life. So wanted to be FIFA president pretty early on and pursued that path throughout the last decade or a bit more. And now, as you say, with World Rugby, but grew up in Germany, where rugby is, of course, not a national sport yet, as some would say. But there is a strong history in my academia and my education around picking things that ultimately lead me into the sports business world. So I was a super enthusiastic person around education and learning, and combining that with my personal passion of sports was a low-hanging fruit ultimately. I found out pretty early that I wasn't good enough to ever be on the field in any sports. I'm not a talented athlete like yourself, so had to look at the administration side and farmed out a few internships early on. Was lucky to work in a sports talent representation agency that had the likes of Jürgen Klopp and Oliver Bierhoff as their clients, and then worked for the German Football Association as an intern for a while, but ultimately got my big break, or my first real job in sports at an agency called Octagon, where I spent the last decade in a bit in various different countries and different offices on the agency side, before then ultimately transitioning to World Rugby last year.
Wow. And I suppose an interesting kind of sidetrack to that is, why rugby, and kind of what excites you the most about rugby? Coming from sort of more of a football background and a football interest, what excites you about rugby?
That's completely fair. Having studied at Loughborough in the UK, where rugby is, of course, one of the dominant sports, and there's an elite level student team, some of them obviously playing in the national team and even for countries like France. I really fell in love with the sport then and started working on the brand side after university, where some of the big sponsors were going into various different sports. We'd have a football partnership, we'd have a motorsports partnership, and then we started sponsoring the Rugby World Cup 2015 with MasterCard, and they were principal global partner at the time. So really good set of rights, really good ability to activate around the World Cup. And I was seconded from Germany to the UK for 5-6 months, working purely on the Rugby World Cup. And I think that's probably the origin story.
That's amazing. Yeah. What would you say for the position you're in? What's the biggest misconception that big companies have when they're considering, or they're thinking about a sports partnership?
It's a very interesting question, because you'd come at it from two sides. There's a misconception on our side as those who are selling the rights, but then also on the brand side who are acquiring the rights effectively. I think starting from our lens, the biggest misconception is that there is sort of an automated winning formula to working with a partner or attracting a brand into a sponsorship. There's very data-led companies which want to see a return on investment before entering into a negotiation. They're very much focused on the media equivalent value of a bit of branding exposure, or the ability to host customers through hospitality and the potential business value that comes off the back of that. And it is extremely quantitative. There's evaluation processes. They sometimes have an agency that evaluates proposals, and they're putting us up against many other sports, and they're making that decision. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, there's still that emotional, human to human. Senior leadership is interested in rugby or interested in another sport and wants to explore a partnership, and the business itself is almost set up by some people at the top to give this a long hard look, and those conversations then unfold very differently, and the way of structuring a partnership is probably a little bit more creative in the sense of what you're trying to achieve and less regimented. And so yeah, we bring in brands on both sides of that spectrum.
And I guess it must be difficult in that way that maybe people are coming, organizations are coming in at different levels and thinking of what they want to get out of it, right? And then
Yeah.
you being able to manage the expectations of what they actually can get out of it, versus what also World Rugby needs to get out of that kind of relationship. Is that quite a difficult sort of balancing act to keep?
Balancing act is a ample way to describe it. That leads me to sort of the misconception on the brand side is clearly that we have a standardized way of delivering partnerships and helping the rights being transferred, but it is much less standardized than one would think, because our ambition is clearly to be bespoke and tailored to the needs of every different organization. And that also leads you down a path of working with brands in slightly different ways. It might not be that, every Wednesday there's a jour fix and we speak once a week about how we're doing in terms of our social media content series or what the LED perimeter signage will look like. There's a geographic component. We're an incredibly diverse and global organization. So the brands we work with might be in New Zealand or the States or in South Africa. And so there's really no way to say that there's a standardized way of delivering a partnership. And when you're on the brand side and you're trying to obviously think in the best interest of your shareholders and your executives and what the brand wants to achieve, and on the World Rugby side, making that brand happy. So obviously our primary objective. But then we have a responsibility that is wider for the whole sport and to develop the grassroots side of the game, to grow the women's game. And in that, there's sometimes a balancing act to strike between what a brand might want and need and what is in the best interest of the game. Most of the time, this hopefully aligns. Around big tournaments, it certainly does. But that is a juxtaposition at times.
And that's really interesting because I suppose from my point of view, just as a spectator, I see that probably World Rugby, just in my sort of head, they want to grow the women's game. They want to spread participation to other parts of the world. Naturally, when you're trying to establish partnerships, then it should have those kinds of missions in mind. Is that something that's kind of pushed onto you that we need to grow the women's game, so we need partnerships that are going to work with us for the women's World Cup? So what are you going to do in that way? Is that the kind of like the pressure that you get from World Rugby in that way, or is it purely on a sort of commercial sort of financial aspect?
No, I pride ourselves in not being a purely commercially driven entity. We have a wider responsibility for the game that thankfully everyone from the top down understands. Clearly, revenues are important for the financial sustainability of the sport, be it individual players or teams or nations as in unions. There is a responsibility to bring in revenues and attract new audiences and sponsorships to ultimately grow the game and make it more and more professional. Clearly at the top end in terms of Rugby World Cups and some of the elite unions across the world, that is a very commercial business. But in many countries, we've got over 120 members. We have to be realistic about where rugby sits in comparison to some of the other sports and some of the other forms of entertainment and health and education. And there's a lot of work to be done to grow it, to make it what is a global sport to something that is comparable to football, which is generally everywhere.
And I guess what's interesting is the the cultures and the countries that you are then approaching, and the companies that are based in different countries, different cultures around the world. How is working with different cultures, different organizations, spread about across the globe? How is it different? How do you have to change your approach to working with those people? And I come at it in a sense because I lived in Asia for 10, 11 years. So I understand that working with CEOs, directors, business leaders in China, it can be very different to speaking with Western business owners. But then at the same time, people are people, business is business. I kind of very curious. What's your kind of approach to that?
People are people, and there's an emotional intelligence to connect with anyone on a basic level. But I do have to say that the stereotypes that sometimes exist around different nationalities and different cultures are a good starting point when used in measure.
Hmm.
I'm one of the more Germanic people that would work within World Rugby by the nature of being a Bavarian, but the way I conduct my Excel, my Outlook, my organization of the day is probably a little bit of an epitome of what German stereotypes are. Similarly, we've got, people from all parts of the world working in the organization who bring a bit of a flavor and uniqueness, and you can
Hmm.
see that their culture is making the overall product of our commercial offering certainly a lot better.
Hmm.
And to answer your question outright, when dealing with different CEOs and heads of marketing and heads of sponsorship in different brands, the geography does play an important role. Japan is an incredibly important market for World Rugby and rugby as a whole. For instance, the United States are a key growth market, and there's a very different way of conducting meetings and business and partnerships and in the initial phase of attracting a partner or forming a partnership, but then also later down the line in the delivery and
Hmm.
seeing how one best activates the rights that are given to a sponsor. I do see a lot of cultural nuance in how we have to handle those brands and those individuals, and picking sometimes the right people to work with each other is an art, not a
Hmm.
science.
Hmm. In that way, is it very much a kind of wine and dine sort of relationship step by step? Oh, we've got this meeting arranged, this fantastic opportunity with the director of blah blah company. We're going to meet in person, and then we've arranged a dinner, and then we've got tickets to this football match or this cricket match or this rugby match. Is it really like sort of in that way, like slowly, slowly?
I think if you asked my family or close friends about what I do, their assumption is probably I take people to the pub all day, and that's how partnerships in rugby are made. That is hopefully not true because my liver is happy for it. But the reality is that the sort of wining and dining and hosting and hospitality and just building a human to human relationship is incredibly important. So yes, I would say on the sometimes 12-month journey of formulating a partnership, those moments when there's a planned social gathering or an opportunity to meet for a coffee when somebody's traveling through town, those little drops ultimately fill up a glass of a successful business relationship. So I'm all in favor, but not forgetting that the other side that we talked about a bit briefly earlier, the sort of qualitative and quantitative argument side of this is why this is good for your business is equally
Yeah,
as important, and there needs to be a give between those two.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. Do you tend to find yourself when you get companies, organizations, maybe directly reaching out to you, is there is it a yes, like almost like a sort of Tinder, like yes, yes, no, 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 that kind of approach that you'll maybe put companies through? They're a right fit, they're not a right fit. Or equally, is it a lot of you reaching out to your ideal kind of company and your ideal location for whatever maybe tournament or specific kind of relationship that you want to establish? Is it a mixture of the two that you generally work on?
It's a mixture, but I would say heavily skewed towards the latter, in that
Mm,
that we do prefer a proactive approach from our side to go and take what we think is a good proposal to a brand.
mm,
Clearly, there are a lot of very savvy marketers in the world of sports sponsorship who evaluate different sports and different events on a weekly or a monthly basis to see where would my business fit best, and who might get the idea of the rugby audience is one that is interesting to us. Our consumers have either a big crossover with the audience, or that is the type of market we're trying to break into, and then they do come to us, and obviously we entertain those conversations. And there's nothing akin to swiping right on Tinder until we've vetted the opportunity properly and at least had a conversation. But
yeah.
it is a lot more frequent for us to take a proposal to a partner that we feel would add real value to the tournament or to the game. Our best friends in marketing and in sponsorships are usually on the events and procurement side of a business, because it
Right.
takes an incredible amount of effort to put on something like a Rugby World Cup. And there's
Mm,
a lot of interesting touch points where you might not suspect a brand partnership may come from, but from what the players need to drink, to what the match officials need to wear, to who's organizing the cars, to the accommodation, to the defibrillators that are being used in the training grounds. There's so many touch points where naturally as a tournament we would think, wouldn't it be great to have a partner here who lends us their expertise, their products, their services, and sometimes from that stems a broader partnership with marketing rights as well.
yeah, yeah. So many fine details to get right throughout, right? I mean, would you
So
say the trends for generally establishing partnerships and keeping partnerships going, has that changed over time? Has that changed sort of? I like to. People probably don't like me to say sort of COVID, right? Oh, that word again. But pre-COVID, post-COVID, and especially now going into the sort of AI age, are the trends changing in the way that you handle partnerships?
sport is a very old industry. Even from a World Rugby perspective, we were founded in 1886. That there's a natural sort of progression of partnerships over time, but it is quite cyclical in that trends and things come back. The sort of milestone moments when the whole behavior of the industry changes are far and few between. COVID would be one for sure, and we'll see if AI evolves into something similar. But the thirst for, I'm going to call it, experiences and live events certainly got a humongous boost coming back out of lockdowns across the world. So partnerships that had been based on the creation of digital and social content and the above the line media assets certainly took more of an element of how can we get people back together and work on experiential activations in a fan zone, or the ticket and hospitality piece, which has always been sort of fundamental to sponsorship,
Mm,
was upweighted again following COVID because there was just this appetite to get back into experience culture.
mm,
But yeah, the trends more broadly are the same as they are in other sports, in that, finding purpose and purpose-driven partnerships, the natural appetite for women's sports, because that's a huge growth area. Those are the things we're focusing on as well. And artificial intelligence would be one of those where in the next 2, 3 years, we have a lot of catching up to do as an industry to probably other sectors of society, which are already a bit ahead.
mm, mm. It's interesting because so when you think of AI or technology, I think rugby can, as a sport, I mean, just at the well, the competitive sort of aspect of rugby is they're kind of the early adopters, right? Before the VR technology, the way that they've adopted things, probably about 10 years, 10, 15 years it's been going in rugby, I think.
Yeah.
Um, um, I mean, do you see rugby in other areas of sort of AI integration being that sort of early adopter? So like you say, 2, 3 years, things will be very different not just within business, but just generally in life with the sort of AI revolution that we're going through. Uh, is rugby is an organization that sort of open to change in that way?
Open to change. Of course, it's the responsibility you have though for the global game that makes you wanna adopt things that are tried and tested and proven. Oftentimes the innovation comes from smaller pockets within the sport and then we try and scale. I mean, in terms of injury prevention and statistics that are being used around the game, there are some very innovative things done within rugby, and I'm quite excited that at the Women's Rugby World Cup, which will be starting in a month's time, we for instance will have things provided by our technology partner Capgemini, which I would see as truly unique even within the world of sports in terms of AI insights that get generated during games and then fed to audiences or served to audiences during the matches. Those types of things excite me,
Mm.
but at the same time, because there are so many AI tools and so many possibilities, it is sometimes very difficult to see, the forest for the trees. The reality is we need to be prudent about what to adopt, and this is where probably I'm being a bit too German, but that's certainly in the early adopter phase. There's, I think, other sports which are candidly a little bit ahead, and I
Mm.
think we as rugby as a whole need to work better together to get to the forefront of that.
Interesting. Say like at the director level, at the level that you work at, do you see the impact that AI is having on the way that you conduct, business on a day-to-day basis, in a good way or a bad way?
Certainly, yes. I mean, the reality of a director level or mid-management, senior management is oftentimes that the variety of requests you deal with is clearly the challenge. So on a daily basis, you're dealing with the scale of the emails, or the scale of the meetings, or the scale of the problems,
Mm.
and the automation that is already happening behind the scenes is incredibly relieving in the sense that when we're preparing meeting notes or board updates, or you're trying to inform 50 different countries about a rule change, or there's an announcement of a partnership and we're trying to get releases out, or there's an event that we would love to invite people to. So the things that were bread and butter for executives back in the day are becoming automated so quickly that it allows directors to really focus on the human management, the people to people relationship of my department is doing this, set the vision, focus on the key objectives, but don't get bogged down in the administrative running of the department. There's a lot more strategic headspace in today's age compared to probably the jobs I was doing 5 years ago, where the automation wasn't quite as helpful.
Yeah, that's amazing, and that's I think the kind of trend in what we hear from people,
Mm.
and I think the right kind of message that a lot of people at a CEO director level should understand that that's the whole point of AI is to take away the administrative, repetitive tasks to leverage you to be able to spend more time on those higher value tasks, and especially for someone in your position, the highest value task is actually face to face talking with people, right? So if you can spend more time, better time doing those kinds of tasks, then that's better, right? And if you can get AI to do the rest, create the reports, send out the emails, do all of the tables, that's great, right? I don't need to touch that anymore.
You phrase that incredibly well. It's focusing on what's important and on your classic scale of urgent, important, taking those tasks that can be automated.
Mm,
There's probably a lot that I don't know that I could be automating, which I should be doing.
mm.
We experimented a few weeks ago with a Notebook LM, which turns long meetings into podcasts. So you can hear the almost summary of a 2 hour conference in a 30 second, in a 1 minute, in a 30 minute summary on audio when you're commuting to work or from work, saving time. The reality of meeting notes and ChatGPT. answering questions that we usually find quite difficult, helping with, tricky emails or tricky conversations. There's so much good assistance that we could be drawing on, and I'm only scratching the surface here. There's many, many tools which I wish we were aware of, which we probably aren't.
Yeah, and it's constantly evolving as well. That's the thing. AI is creating AI tools. Is the world that we're living in at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, but amazing, thinking that the human connection, the human touch, that has to be at the core of what you do in partnerships. Now, just wondering for anyone listening in, that might be a CEO of a big major corporation, what advice would you give them if they're thinking about dabbling in sports partnerships, going into that kind of area? What would be the kind of the one thing that you'd want them to understand before they reach out, or even if they're being approached by someone like yourself? What is something that you'd want them to understand at the first sort of step?
I think at the core of it, sports is a people business, and I think a lot of industries will say that, but it might be more lip service than reality. But in our world, it doesn't matter if it's a B2B company or a B2C company is ultimately trying to reach consumers versus trying to convince others of the quality of their service offering. The output is exciting people about a sport and having something to root your company in that you don't get in any other form of society apart from music, entertainment, culture. We work so hard from Monday to Friday, all of us, that what we want on the weekend is a bit of muse, a bit of inspiration, and even in a world where you've got the whole world at your fingertip and you can watch your favorite clips from the other corner of the world in an instant. The reality is like that escape that a sporting event or a concert offers you is something unique that I think that will have even more value in society 50 years from now than today. So we're building from like a really, really strong base. And I was maybe worried that 10 years ago, the jobs that we were doing would be replaced because of the nature of so much of your day being emails and PowerPoint decks, etc. But the reality is that the networks that people have built and the fact that you can pick up the phone to somebody who you used to work with 5 years ago, or somebody you think understands the sport or can help you with the challenge you're trying to fix for a certain tournament, that is incredibly important.
Mm.
One other bit of advice I would add is that the sports industry is probably a very attractive destination for graduates at the moment because there's a cultural shift to, doing what you love for most of the week, and that's why there's probably more sports management graduates now than there would have been, 20 years ago. I think we're still of the generation where our bosses never wrote CVs to get the jobs they were in. There was a clear human to human relationship getting you a network that you had that got you into the jobs. And then before you know it, there was 10,000 people coming out of UK universities every year that had sports in their degree title, and
Yeah.
the industry ballooned up quite quickly. So I think now we're at the point where the market is a bit saturated, and getting into the industry and growing in it isn't as easy as it was. At a director level, I would also point to the fact that, a lot of people in sports were able to stay in their positions for a very long time. I worked on the agency side and the federation side, and the reality is that a lot of the most powerful people in sport, if you look at the list of the 100 most influential people in the sport industry and took out the athletes, that there's people who are doing this in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s who are still incredibly invested and active in the day-to-day running of clubs and administration. So that is an extremely long tenure that you're able to have in the sport industry that again makes it attractive, but also makes it difficult to break through.
Very, very, very interesting. Uh, what would you then say for yourself as someone who's been in the sports industry for quite a little while so far, I would say, and
Trying to
I
show
guess
our
that you
age
want to
here.
continue that for a long time. What is the vision going forward for yourself and for World Rugby?
It's a big question. I mean, certainly for myself, there is that appetite I talked about earlier about keeping learning and keeping sort of a growth mindset that got me into sports, that got me into sports business. Hopefully, being able to maintain that, and when there are new solutions that AI or something else offers, being up to speed on them very quickly. I mean, the sort of notion of managing my email inbox effectively is something that I spent an inordinate amount of time with. So when I was in my early 20s, probably spent, 2 hours a week doing analytics on my own email management to find out, how was I responding to things, how quickly, what was I prioritizing correctly to hopefully master a skill that will serve you then for the rest of your career. And I have the feeling that there will be many AI solutions over the next months where if you really ingrain yourself and learn them, it will be a bit like playing golf or tennis. You had a lot of lessons to begin with, you got to a certain level, and then you're able to maintain that for the rest of your career. That's a sort of a strong foundation you need to build. So that's something I would hopefully try to do.
Mm.
And as for a vision for World Rugby when it comes to AI, I think that's too big a question to ask in a short podcast. There's certainly an ambition to grow the sport globally, and we're spending a lot of time in the US, where we're happy to be hosting the Rugby World Cup 2031 and 33 for the women's, and that market in of itself offers an opportunity that is incredibly broad. It's the world's biggest sports market, and taking rugby to that effectively is a challenge we're really, really looking forward to.
Amazing, amazing. I'm looking forward to it. And the Women's World Cup just around the corner, right?
I hope you got your tickets. I mean, it's we're going live in Sunderland on August 22nd, building up to a final in Twickenham on September 27th. So
Sunderland could be
hopefully
the closest one to me, so I think I'll have to try and look for those tickets.
that opening game, England against USA, is going to be hopefully a real milestone in the history of the sport. I mean, looking at ticket sales and things already, I think we can safely say that we're good. Like it's like a paradigm shift in the game, and it's going to be the biggest women's rugby World Cup ever. The reality of that is, I think, clear just based on the number of tickets that have been sold and the great commercial partners that we've got interested in the tournament. And I
Mm.
just hope that, the excitement then carries over to the general population, and we get full stadia and viewing parties and people coming to fan zones, engaging with the sport, and then hopefully we build a new fanship of women's rugby for a few generations.
Amazing, amazing, brilliant. And if anyone wants to reach out to you directly, Taz, what's the best way for people to contact you?
I mentioned emails once or twice in the meeting, but yeah, tassilo.hanau@rugby.org will get you in the inbox,
Yeah,
and open to hearing from people who are working on the brand side and are interested in rugby, from agencies, young people who are trying to start out in the sport industry. Usually try and take some time to meet as many people as I can who are excited about growing the sport and are interested in, talking
brilliant.
to a Bavarian sports marketer.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I will put those contact details below this video, so anyone who wants to can easily find them. But a big, big thank you, Taz, for joining us today. It was a fantastic discussion.
Thank you very much for having me.
Brilliant. And thank you, everyone, for listening.